Dead Man's Hand is understandably a little bit of a sensitive subject for a lot of Malifaux players. If you weren't around for the last culling between 2nd and 3rd edition, Wyrd made the bold decision to actually kill off some of the characters in the game, as well as in the story, and effectively remove them altogether. Now, it wasn't quite that dramatic. There are still playable rules for all of the characters that were put into Dead Man's Hand, but they don't seem to be particularly well balanced, and most people don't like to play them, even in casual games in my experience. And for obvious reasons, this kind of left a bad taste in some people's mouths, because if you were a Ramos, a Kalodi, a Lilith, or a Nika player, or if for some reason you played a lot of Ryle, then you probably didn't feel really good about that decision going into 3rd edition. Now, when it was originally announced, there was talk about how it was going to be a sort of temporary thing where Masters would kind of come and go from Dead Man's Hand over time, and it was kind of supposed to be a way to balance the meta of the game. But so far, we haven't seen that happen. It has just been a couple of Masters that have gone into Dead Man's Hand, and they've never come out, and no one else has been added. But of course, I don't know why these decisions were being made, or what kind of decisions are being made about this for the future. But I will say that all of the Dead Man's Hand Masters have a pretty clear path that I could see them following in the narrative to kind of bring them back into the story. None of them appear to be dead permanently, with the possible exception of Ryle. Rest in peace, Ryle. Now, we also don't know why the decisions were made about who to kill off and who not to kill off, with the exception of Nika, because that was put to a community vote. And we also don't know if they plan to ever do any more Dead Man's Hand Masters, but I thought it would be fun to go through and try to decide who is most likely to be killed off in the narrative going forward. So let's go through every faction, and we will pick out the master in each faction who's most likely to be killed off, strictly just based on the narrative. I'm not going to talk about why some masters should be killed off because of balance reasons or anything like that, because we'll leave that to another channel. Now, if I talk about killing off your favorite master, then you'll be happy to hear that I have no input in this decision-making process here, and I'm just speculating as to who I think is most likely to be killed. So don't get down in the comments and leave me angry messages about how I'm trying to ruin the game for you. Or actually do go down and leave angry comments, because good comments are good for the algorithm, but so are bad comments, so go for it. Now, I'm sure this video is going to trigger quite a few people, but to make it up to you, I am going to do a huge giveaway at the end of the video. If you didn't catch my recent post, we recently just made it to 3,000 subscribers on this channel, so huge thank you to everybody who has subscribed, who has shared my videos with other people, or spread the word in any way. And because we've hit such a big milestone, I'm going to be giving away a Brine and Bones set, as well as a Salty Sea Devil. So this will be the entire Pirate Molly keyword. Except for Archie. You might want to grab Archie because he got a little hat in this set, which is cool. But anyway, stick around till the end of the video if you want to know how to enter to win that set. It is easily the biggest giveaway I've done on the channel so far, and it's one of my favorite sets Wyrd's ever done, so I'm sure a lot of people will be excited for this. So don't miss your chance to enter to win. Now, a few things that I want to consider when I'm deciding who's most likely to go Dead Man's Hand. One, and the main one really, is where they are in their story arc at this point. A lot of characters have already had a pretty self-contained and complete story arc up until this point, and if they don't have anything else to do in the story, then I think that makes them a little bit more likely to be killed off, because what else are you going to do with them? If they're right in the middle of the action and there's something very important and dramatic going on with them in the main story, then I don't think they're going to get killed off, because we have to see that story arc come to its conclusion before that character could die or be written out. The second thing I want to consider is what would happen with the rest of that master's keyword. At least in the past, when they've done Dead Man's Hand, they just killed off the master and the totem. They did not kill off the rest of the models in their crew, even though keywords weren't really a thing in 2nd edition. So if they're going to take a master out of the game, then all the rest of the models in the keyword would have to find a new home. Now, maybe they get moved to another keyword, if that makes sense, or maybe they add a new master that basically just takes the place of the existing master, but either way, I think that's a major consideration that Wyrd would have to make when they're deciding who to kill off. And the last thing that I'm going to consider, and maybe the least important, but in some ways the most important, is the sort of meta considerations of how do people feel about this master in real life. There's a couple of masters in the game that are a little bit problematic, and they're kind of a relic of an older time, and I feel like maybe it's their time to go. And I'm mostly just talking about 2 masters. I'm sure you can guess who they are, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But let's get into it and start by talking about the guild. Now, the guild is probably the most difficult one to decide here, because most of these characters have active story arcs, and there's at least something going on in the story for them where it doesn't feel like their story is about to wrap up or has wrapped up. I'm mostly going to avoid talking about a lot of the really new characters in this video, because I think it's very unlikely that they're going to kill off a master that they only added to the game within the last couple of years. So Bass and Tull are almost certainly safe from Dead Man's Hand, at least in the near future. I think that Lucius is in a kind of weird spot in the narrative right now, because he's kind of on the outs with the guild right now. Ever since Marlowe took over, it hasn't really felt like he's had a role to play, except as being the kind of angsty teenage boy that stands outside of the Enclave and moans about how his boss doesn't like him enough. And he's always kind of occupied a weird position between the Guild and the Neverborn, and it's never been clear what his actual goals are. It seems like he's kind of just out for his own quest for power, but is he really aligned with anyone in the Neverborn? Does he really care about getting back into power in the Guild? Who really knows? But I don't think he's most likely to go Dead Man's Hand because I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think he's a really interesting character, so I'm hoping that we're going to see a new story arc start with him where they get into a little bit more of the detail about what he's trying to do and how he's going to do it. Now, there's an obvious choice here for who I would like to see go Dead Man's Hand, and I think that Sonia Creed has had a pretty complete story arc up until this point with everything that went on between her and Sherufe. But I also think it's possible that with the crossover between Malifaux and the other side, that we're going to see them lean a little bit more into this story between her and the Court of Two and the situation with Karai and everybody. Plus, if you've read Ashes of Malifaux, I won't spoil anything directly, but there was an appearance with Sonia Creed, and it kind of developed some of the other antagonistic relationships that she's got going on. I think it's possible that Perdita would get killed off because she has never really had a story much at all. She kind of was involved in some of the situation with the Red Cage falling, but not really directly, and she helped get the mask to protect Sonia from Sherufe, but she was always a background character in a lot of those plots, and she's never really been the main character in any major story arc. But I kind of hope at one point that she will rise to prominence because I think she is an interesting character, and I think there's a lot of potential there, especially because of her strange relationship with the Guild. But my choice for who is most likely to go Dead Man's Hand for the Guild is Lady Justice. Now, I think this would be a really crazy decision for Wyrd to make, but they killed off Lilith, so we know that they will do it. Don't dare them, because they're kind of crazy like that. And the main reason that I think it's Lady Justice is because last time around, we literally had a vote, and if it went the other way, she'd already be dead. Now, that shows that they had some kind of plan in place for what they were going to do with her character and the rest of her outfit in the Guild if she were to be killed off. And obviously, the story has gone in a different direction up until this point, but I also think that her story has kind of come to a head now. She's had this whole vendetta against the rest of the Resurrectionists, and she eventually won against Nika and killed him off, losing the judge in the process. And now she's got another vendetta against Dr. McMorning because he was kind of doing necromancy right under her nose this whole time, and she feels really guilty about it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some sort of big story arc between her and McMorning where she's trying to hunt him down, and maybe in the process of doing that, she either dies or gets injured so badly that she's forced to retire. We know that Marlowe was actually planning to sideline her anyway because he wanted her to just kind of be the face of the Guild's recruitment efforts. She's pretty famous and well liked around the city, so they were just going to put her on posters and make her like the Uncle Sam guy that tries to recruit you into the army in the United States. Hopefully that's a reference that anyone outside the United States gets, but you can Google it. I think I'd be sad to see Lady Justice go, and I'm not exactly sure what they would do with the rest of her keyword. I don't think they could fold her models into other keywords. I think they would have to keep a martial keyword and probably promote the judge or some other new character to take her place. Next up, the Resurrectionists. I don't think there's any good reason to bury the lead here. Sheamus is out. Now, if you don't know a lot about Sheamus, then maybe go read a little bit of his early lore, but basically this guy is the worst of the worst. And not just in a fun, murdery kind of way like most people in Malifaux are. He's got an extra level of creepiness because he preys on sex workers, is definitely a pervert, and he probably engages in sexual assault with a lot of them, which is not fun or a good look at all. Now, I think a lot of Sheamus' backstory is kind of a relic of an earlier time, and you can definitely notice that over time, Sheamus has kind of fallen out of the spotlight in the story quite a bit. He used to be one of the main characters. He used to kind of be the face of a lot of the early story arcs, and he was involved in a lot of different things that were going on, but lately he hasn't really done much of anything. He sort of showed up at the raid on the Guild Enclave with McMorning and Nika, but aside from that, he hasn't really participated in much at all. He's still got the Gorgon's Tear in his head, so he's still kind of important in that sense, but I think there's a good chance that we're going to see a story about that being undone, and maybe that will lead to his undoing. And we even got the new character, the Strange Lady in Ashes of Malifaux, who seems to be out looking for the Gorgon's Tear, and she kind of looks like the Gorgon, so I don't know what that's all about really, but I think there's some chance that that's going to be the beginning of a story arc where we see Sheamus' downfall. And frankly, I'm not going to be super upset. Now, another interesting thing to note about Sheamus is that I think his crew will be really easy to just fold into other crews without too much trouble. When 3rd edition started and they split his crew and Molly off into their own keywords, it sort of felt a little bit weird to me because Molly's crew felt like a bit of a mishmash, and that's kind of the point of her crew, I guess. But her thing was always that she was kind of the main belle and had a special relationship with the other Rotten Bells. So I think about half of Sheamus's keyword could just be put into Forgotten, and it would work just fine. And personally, I would kind of like to see Molly hanging out with the Rotten Bells again because I thought that was cool. Some of the models like Betty Noir might work better as a versatile, or maybe they could fit in with Von Stuck or something like that for whatever reason they want to have happen in the story. But I don't think there's anything in his crew that is like so unique that it needs to stay its own separate crew. It's kind of just a bunch of undead stuff that you could just move over to another keyword and it'd be totally fine. On the other hand, the cooler thing would be if they would just replace him with a new master, and I have just the person in mind. Emline Belrose has been in the story and the game for a long time as an alternate model, and I think it's about time that she comes to the game properly. There's a little bit of a backstory for her. She used to work for the Elite Division under Lucius, and at some point she got turned into an undead, but she retained her ability to sort of think for herself and her own free will and her personality. She features a lot in the Through the Breach books, especially the Bestiaries, but she's also shown up in at least one of the main stories for Malifaux proper. She's kind of interesting because she has the power of persuasion. She kind of talks to people and gets them to do what she wants just by having a conversation. And there's also a very strong hint that she's gay. So even before we had Abel and Domingo in Ashes of Malifaux, who are our first official gay couple, I think it's fair to say that Emmeline was our first gay character. It's never stated outright, but I think it's implied heavily enough that we can say that she is in fact a lesbian. I want her to come to the game. I think it would make sense for some of the stuff in Sheamus's keyword to move over into her keyword, and it might not be a one-to-one replacement for his playstyle and everything, but I think she could fit the bill as a pseudo-replacement pretty nicely. But mostly I just want to see her come to the game, so either way, just bring her to the game as a master. It'd be dope. Now, for the Neverborn, I'm almost tempted to skip them entirely, and that's because the Neverborn players have been so abused last time around for Dead Man's Hand. They actually lost 2 masters to Dead Man's Hand entirely, one which didn't get a replacement at all, and then another master left the faction and moved over to just being 10 Thunders. So if you were a Neverborn player, there was a chance that you lost 3 masters that you play, and it did mean that they got more new masters, which I think is a pretty cool deal, but it's been rough for a lot of Neverborn players out there. But that being said, I think you guys can take it, so we're going to talk about who else we're going to kill off. Now, I have 2 choices for who I think are likely to be killed off, and I think a lot of people are really not going to like the second one. The first one is Nikima, and I think it's pretty obvious because she overthrew her sister Lilith and sort of killed her and banished her to Nythera, and now is sort of struggling to gain power as a leader among the Neverborn. The Neverborn as a faction have never been as disunited as they are right now. And Nikima even went as far as to go wake up her Uncle Castor, who was not really a big supporter of hers in the past anyway. Now, I suspect that this might be the beginning of a story arc where we see Lilith come back and reunite with her uncle, who was a supporter of Lilith's. And maybe there's going to be another struggle for power between her and her sister. Now, would it be especially interesting to just see her come back and have a reversal of what happened last time where she defeats Nikima and then Nikima goes away and she takes back over power? I'm not really sure that would be super satisfying, but I think there's some chance that that's going to be what happens because they're a pretty easy palette swap for each other. You can kind of just put Lilith back in Nikima's place and the whole rest of the keyword just falls right into line. Obviously, the 2 of them have a slightly different playstyle themselves as masters, but the rest of the crew is basically one-to-one the same. And even from a story perspective, they kind of fill the same niche as the leader of the Black Bloods among the Neverborn. Just Lilith's a little bit smarter and more conniving, whereas Nikima is a rage machine that just murders stuff. But if you want to know who I think is the most likely to be killed off, then I'm going to go with Zoraida. Now, I know a lot of you just groaned when you heard me say that, but hear me out here. There's a couple of reasons I think it's likely that Zoraida is going to be killed off, and one of them, and probably the most important one, is that Zoraida has not really been doing anything for like a full edition now, plus. She was kind of a big mover and shaker early on, and she was manipulating things with the other Neverborn Masters from the shadows and trying to prevent the tyrants from coming back into power. And she always seemed to have her finger on the pulse of what was going on. But over time, we've really seen her ability to influence things wane. Even her ability to see the future, which it's questionable whether that was ever really a thing or not, seems to not be particularly reliable anymore. And part of that is because Titania has come back and has been messing with her abilities. But even with that being the case, she's lost most of her real allies, and we've kind of seen her relegated to making brief appearances in a few stories every once in a while as like a quest giver, basically. She hasn't really been directly involved with much on the Neverborn side, and even the gremlins in the Bayou seem to have shunned her at the sort of democracy election where they decided that she wasn't a gremlin, so she can't be part of their kind of power structure, and she's stopped really being able to influence them much at all. So I kind of feel like her story has come to an end to a certain extent, but in addition to all of that, if you go back and read some of the first edition and some of the early second edition lore, there's a few conversations between Zoraida and Lilith where Lilith comments that Zoraida seems to be getting very old, and Zoraida even hints at one point that she is not long for this earth. Or this Malifaux, whatever the expression would be in Malifaux. She's going to die, that's my point, she's going to die. Now, we know that Zoraida is a human, and we know that she's been around since at least the first breach opening, which makes her over 100 years old. So obviously there's something magical going on that's keeping her alive, but something like that probably isn't going to work forever. And again, it's even explicitly sort of referenced in the lore that she's not immortal. She's not just going to live indefinitely. So I think it would kind of make sense for her to come to an end, and the question then becomes, what do they do with her crew? Is there going to be a replacement for Zoraida, somebody to step up and take her place? And I don't really see that happening. There isn't really like a protege that she has that would be an easy replacement for her. Sammy LaCroix is kind of like a wannabe Zoraida, and she like does voodoo and stuff like that, but I don't think she can fill the same role as Zoraida used to, where she's sort of manipulating a lot of the other Neverborn, because I don't see the Neverborn following a gremlin. Maybe she takes over the keyword and kind of does some Neverborn-y stuff, but I don't think that's a great fit, and I think a lot of the rest of her keyword could kind of fit in other places anyway. There's enough other Bayou Masters or things like Marcus or Lord Cooper that kind of focus on monsters and animals that I think a lot of the stuff in Swamp Fiend could just be repurposed elsewhere. Plus, it's a giant keyword. It's got so many models in it that I kind of feel like it needs to be split up anyway, to be honest. Now, if they did want to replace her, then potentially a good replacement would be the Black Dragon. If you don't know, the Black Dragon is actually half of the Tyrant, the dragon that seems to have landed in the Bayou, inhabited a woman who is now sort of manipulating some of the gremlins and teaching them necromancy and weird magic. I don't really see a reason why the Black Dragon would be part Neverborn. I would kind of think it would be part Bayou and part Resurrectionist. And I also don't really see it being a leader of the Swamp Fiend keyword specifically. I kind of feel like it would have a little bit more of a necromancy angle and maybe have some undead and zombies and things like that. But if we're just looking for a new master that kind of has the same Swamp Hag vibe, I think that could kind of fill that niche to an extent. Hey, if you want to scare away the Dead Man's Hand gremlins and keep them from getting their paws on your favorite master, then consider hitting the like button and making sure you subscribe to this channel. It definitely won't help in any way at all, except that it'll make me kind of happy, and it'll be fun, and more people will watch Malifaux content on YouTube. So that's good. Can't help you with your master, though, sorry. But anyway, consider sharing this video with some other folks who you think might enjoy it, and be sure to check out the links in the description below for things like my Wyrd affiliate link, where you can make purchases on Wyrd's web store and support the channel as you do it, as well as the merch store, where you can pick up cool t-shirts or mugs, or all sorts of other things with my logo on them if you want to rep Defective Dice. Plus, there's a Patreon where you can support me at a couple of different tiers and get all sorts of different benefits, one of which is an extra entry into the giveaway that's going on starting today for the Pirate Molly box set. So you'll definitely want to check that out, and there's all sorts of other cool stuff there, but mostly free models is probably what you want, so check it out. But with that, let's get right back to killing off your favorite masters. The Arcanists. So no one from Arcanist can die because it's my favorite faction. It's the one I play, and so they're all safe. Moving on. Okay, fine. We'll talk about the Arcanists. We'll kill somebody on Team Blue. You know, the good guys aren't supposed to die. Anyway, there's a couple of different masters in the Arcanist that I think have kind of wrapped up their story and could be on the outs in the future. Now, it used to be that I would have said that Marcus was the best choice for Dead Man's Hand, because he's another one that's kind of been around for a really long time, never really had an important role in the story, and he's never really made sense as a member of the Arcanist, or any other faction for that matter. He kind of just does his own thing in the forest and doesn't pay attention to much else that's going on. And we obviously got this really big story at the beginning of 3rd edition where he has beef with Lord Cooper, and the two of them seem to be setting up for a showdown. Now, as much as I think that in reality, if that fight were to go down, that Marcus would absolutely win, no question, I don't think they're going to kill off Lord Cooper so quick because he just got added to the game. So I think if one of them has to die, it would probably be Marcus, just from a practical perspective. But the reason that I say that I don't think he's going to go Dead Man's Hand is because he just got added to the Neverborn, And I think that there's potential for an interesting story there with his relationship with Titania and how that's going to play into the whole struggle that's going on with the Neverborn at the moment. I almost feel like he could be more connected with the Neverborn in the future in the story than he is with the Arcanist, because he's kind of not really connected with the Arcanist except that they give him some money. But I don't think they would have added him to the Neverborn only to kill him off a few years later. And plus, the Neverborn players are so traumatized that if we kill 2 of their masters, I just don't think they can handle it. But on top of all that, I think there is a better choice here, and that is Rasputina. Now, again, Rasputina is kind of like one of those poster child type characters for Malifaux. She's in like a lot of the marketing, and she's kind of like the face of the game to an extent. A lot of people know her as a character, and she's kind of well liked among the community, I feel. But at the same time, she's kind of been on the brink of getting killed by December for like the whole time since first edition. And she also hasn't really done much since her first kind of power struggle with December and when she kind of reasserted herself after she basically died. She's just kind of up in the mountains being a cannibal and doing Ice Witch things. And once in a while she comes down to the city to terrorize poor innocent people from India. But aside from that, she hasn't really had an impact on the story one way or the other. Now, the big question for her is, what would you do with everything in her crew? Because she's obviously got a crew that is very unique among the Arcanists and doesn't really fit in with anything else in the Arcanists. So I think she's one that we would probably have to replace with a new character to be the master of that same crew. And there's a couple of characters in her crew that I think would fit the bill, but the main one for me is Snow. Snow was a silent one who kind of absorbed part of December's power at one point, and she's described as not as powerful as Rasputina, but I think there's some chance that she's sort of gotten more powerful over the course of the last few years and could step up and take Rasputina's place. The only other Arcanist Master that I think could be on the chopping block would be Caris, and that's because she's got this super antagonistic relationship with the guild where she's constantly going out and doing terrorist attacks, and she's also now influenced by the Burning Man, and both of those things tend to get you killed in the short term for the most part. But the reason I think she's less likely than Rasputina is that I don't think anyone else in the Arcanists really fits that niche in the story particularly well. I think there has to be some people among the Arcanists who exemplify the sort of terrorist archetype in order for the story to be interesting, because if they're all just simple good guys who aren't terrorists, then it kind of gets a little boring. I had a really interesting chat with Doug from Steam Powered Scoundrels a while back about what it would look like if the Arcanists and the MNSU split, and that was one of the topics that we talked about, where if the MNSU was its own faction, it would just kind of be bland, all the good guys doing good guy stuff, and there isn't a lot of intrigue or interest there. And I think we would fall a lot closer into that territory if Caris were to get killed. Even some of the more extreme members of the Arcanists don't tend to be as fond of direct action and like making attacks against the guild. They tend to be more about subterfuge or empowering people to kind of stand against the guild, but not in such a direct way. So I think Caris fits an important role in the story, and that's why I don't think she'll get killed off. The Outcasts are another pretty easy one, I think, because Leviticus has got to go. He's another one that was kind of relevant in the early lore, but he's definitely a creep and probably a pedophile. So just based on that, I think a lot of people would not be upset to see him kicked out of the game. But in addition, he really hasn't been relevant in the lore at all since like the time of the event. This kind of goes along with the thing with Zoraida where they're kind of seeing the future and it may or may not be accurate. But he's supposed to kind of be the leader of the horsemen and he's supposed to save Malifaux in some way, but we haven't really seen anything come of that, and I'm not sure that we ever will. Because ever since that story, he's kind of not really been a main character. He's had a couple of appearances in different stories here or there, but he doesn't really do much. I think it would be pretty easy to replace him because I think Rusty Alice could totally step up and become the master of that crew now and more or less keep the keyword the same as it is now. Maybe Alice learns a little bit about the ways that he brings himself back to life before he dies, or maybe the mechanics change up a little bit when she becomes the master and the crew works a little bit differently, but I think the rest of the models can pretty much stay the same. To be honest, she's kind of a more interesting character than Leviticus ever was anyway, so I feel like it'll be an upgrade all around. Honorable mention, though, for Von Schill, because my dude has been having a rough time. He has lost several limbs over the course of the lore, and recently he's now in this, like, full bodysuit. He's basically like a walking iron lung, and there's barely any of him left. He's kind of Darth Vader, actually. But who knows, maybe he'll last forever in this condition, or maybe something horrible will happen, and he'll get replaced by Hannah. But I'd rather see Leviticus go than Von Schill, so we'll stick with our first choice. The Bayou is another one where I feel like Bayou fans are really abused by Wyrd, and I kind of feel bad talking about killing off one of the characters, because famously the Bayou never gets any kind of story relevance, and very little ever actually happens with any of these characters. Now, we could count Zara as the Bayou Master, but let's be honest, Zara is a Neverborn Master, and we're going to kill off another Bayou Master anyway. So, let's talk about Sommer. Sommer is a character that never really had much of a story. He makes a couple of appearances in the early lore, and he's sort of appears in all of the Bayou stories, but never in an important way, really. His son Lenny is honestly a little bit more important to the overall lore at this point, because he's the Gremlin General. But my read on Sommer is that he was always there to be the horrible misogynist, to contrast against all of the other people who are more or less pretty good on women's rights and equality. That's true of the humans to a large extent. That's certainly not true of the other Gremlins in the Bayou, although obviously there are many very powerful and important female characters in the Bayou, at least compared to the other male characters in the Bayou. But Sommer's always been the guy in the background complaining that women shouldn't be allowed to speak or do anything. And honestly, that's kind of a funny shtick for like one story, but I feel like that's the extent of his personality and his interaction with the story, and I don't think we need that anymore. I also feel like he holds back a lot of the other Bayou characters in terms of the story because he's constantly fighting with everyone else, and he sort of instigates a lot of the infighting among the other Gremlins. The rest of them aren't innocent of it, but he's kind of at the center of it a lot of the time. I think there's a lot of different ways that he could be killed off, but I think the most straightforward would be to have a bunch of the other Gremlins just get sick of his crap and join up with each other to go take him out. The other interesting thing about the Gremlins is that they don't have a super long lifespan, so actually a lot of the Gremlin characters should be dying off at some point here. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see them kind of just hand wave that away and not have all of the characters in the Bayou die at some point and be replaced. I think it would be super easy to replace Sommer in his crew. All we got to do is let the Gremlin General be in charge. I think it would be pretty funny. I think his mechanics should work a lot differently and revolve around the fact that he's kind of dumb. Or maybe he's not as dumb as the rest of the Gremlins. They just think he's dumb. I don't know. It's a little weird the way that they characterize Lenny. But certainly he needs to have a mechanic revolving around his pet pig that he carries around all the time. I guess if Wyrd really wanted to, they could restart a new storyline for Sommer to make him kind of relevant in the story again. But like I said before, they typically don't do that for the Bayou at all. So I don't really see that character going anywhere interesting in the future. So I think he's a good candidate to kick off the boat. The Ten Thunders are another easy one because one of these characters is kind of on his last legs. Jacob Lynch has been having a bad time. And I guess when you make a deal with the Hungering Darkness, then it's probably inevitable that something like this is going to happen. But we know that originally he was pretty resistant to the Brilliance, but over time that has become less and less true. And in his most recent iteration, he looks like a withered husk of a man. Now, he's played a little bit of a part in the story in terms of the conflict between the Neverborn and how Nika came and tried to kill him, but he's never really had a central role in any, important big plots. And I kind of think it's just the natural conclusion of his story that eventually he's just going to be replaced by the Hungering Darkness. Huggy has definitely been sort of increasing his power by spreading brilliance around the city with Jacob's help, and I think it's pretty clear that at some point the Hungering Darkness is going to fully consume Jacob and take his place, or maybe we'll just see a role reversal where the husk of Jacob Lynch will permanently become the totem and the Hungering Darkness will become the master. That's kind of how his title version works right now, but I think we will see a more permanent change to that effect in the future, because look at this guy. I mean, he looks a mess. As for the rest of the Masters, I don't really think that any of them are good candidates to get rid of. I think several of them have some pretty important roles to play in different story arcs, especially Asami, Yanlo, and Mei Fang to an extent with what's going on in Three Kingdoms with the Kimono invasion and everything. Shenlong has never really shown up in the lore much at all, but he's got a tyrant in his head that he's fighting with right now. So maybe that'll be dangerous for him in the long run, but I don't see him getting offed anytime very soon. And Masaki's obviously been having a pretty hard time, but I do not see them killing off Masaki, and also I'll cry if they do. So there's that. Now, if any faction was gonna be exempt from the Dead Man's Hand that isn't Neverborn, then I guess that would be the Explorer Society because they are the newest faction. I think it would be extra feel bad if we were to kill off a master that's only been added to the game in the last 4 or 5 years. But with that being said, I think it'll be fun to just speculate about who they could kill off or who I want to see them kill off if they were to go that route anyway. Lord Cooper, I think, needs to get what's coming to him. I really like the sort of tension that they built up between him and Marcus in the story in 3rd edition, and I would like to see something come of that. Now, maybe he won't die, maybe he'll just lose some limbs, or maybe something unexpected will happen, but I feel like the character has kind of an interesting backstory, but I'm not really sure where they're going with him or what his purpose is going to be. going forward. He doesn't really seem to be interested in dealing with the rest of the Explorer Society. He kind of just goes off and does his own thing. He's also kind of a horrible person, so I wouldn't be super upset to see him get what's coming to him. But either way, I don't think he's the most likely to be killed off if they're going to kill somebody off. I think that honor falls to Jedza. Now, I would be kind of upset to see Jedza get killed off because I think she's really interesting. But her whole backstory is basically about how she wants to rid herself of this curse so she can die, because as of now, she can't. So I think it would be kind of interesting to get a story arc where she goes on a quest to figure out how to actually allow herself to die, and then at the end, she finally gets to rest. She's kind of being tortured by just having to live forever and seems pretty upset about that, so it would be kind of a satisfying end to her character, I think, if that were to be what happens in the long run. I hope it doesn't happen super soon, because I want to see her hang out and do some more stuff in the meantime, but maybe she could be replaced with Mikhail or someone else that we haven't yet met in the lore who can kind of take over her crew and work together with all of them. I don't really think any of the other characters and Explorers are likely to be killed off anytime soon, and frankly, I don't think they're going to kill off either of those characters either, but those would be my picks. So that's it for who I think will get killed off in the next Dead Man's Hand round, if we ever see something like that happen again. So get in the comments below and let me know who your top picks are for who's likely to go Dead Man's Hand and why you think that. And if there's any masters that you would like to exempt from Dead Man's Hand, if you could pick one to protect and make sure they don't get banned from the game. I know Dead Man's Hand is kind of a touchy subject, and honestly, I hope that if Wyrd does it again, they do it in a different way where it's not so permanent and where they continue to balance the characters' rules so that we can feel a little bit better about continuing to play them even after they've gone into Dead Man's Hand. But who knows, maybe they will never do it again, and maybe we'll see the Dead Man's Hand choices be undone in the future. I've asked this question before, but if we could get back one of the Dead Man's Hand characters that have already died, who would you want to see come back to the game? I think in the past, Collodi has been the fan favorite, but I'll be curious to see what you think. Now, last and certainly not least, we are going to be doing a giveaway for the Brine and Bones Pirate Molly Nightmare Edition, as well as the Salty Sea Devil, so that's the whole special edition of the keyword. It is a really cool set, and I'm giving it away as a thank you to the whole community for getting me to 3,000 subscribers. It's super exciting for a small niche channel like this. And if you want to have a chance to win, then you do have to live in the continental United States. And there are two ways that you can enter. One is you can post a comment on this video or any video I put out for the next month. Your comment has to include a flame emoji, and that's how I will know that you're entering the giveaway. It can't just be a flame emoji, you gotta say something else. And if you want to get a bonus entry and double your chances, then you can go over to the Patreon. If you are a supporter over there, you can do the same. Leave a comment with a flame emoji on any of my posts for the next month, and that'll get you an additional entry into the giveaway. Then a month from now, I will randomly choose one person from those comments, and they will win the Brine and Bone set. I'm super excited because I haven't painted mine yet, so whoever wins this, I think we should have a race to see who can get theirs painted up the fastest, because I really need some motivation to actually finally paint that set. There are full rules for the giveaway in the description below, so make sure that you check those out. But with that, I want to send a huge thank you to the extremely cool kids tier on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatized, Devin, and Spilled Paint Pot. And thanks for watching.